Well, we start with news from the UK, where several world leaders and top-level government officials are meeting in London for a conference on Somalia. The meeting seeks to provide international support to the Horn of Africa nation on its course to achieving peace and stability by 2020. Right, Richard Bestic, are you with me? Right, Richard, of course, it seems though this has just been a one-day summit, but of course there's plenty indeed on the agenda. Just starting with you first, talk us through some of the pressing issues on today's agenda and what some of the key outcomes of the summit have been so far.
Well, whether the outcomes are positive or not really depends on your viewpoint, but the choices that were made clear by this conference in London for Somalia were pretty much between the devil and the deep blue sea. Whether security will roll back the boundaries of hunger in Somalia, or whether it will be humanitarian aid that will allow the country to rise again. The European Union Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini said just that. She wants Somalia to rise again, and a commitment from the EU of 200 million euros will go towards the country's development. Mogherini's sentiments were perhaps echoed by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who told the conference Somalia's future hangs in a balance between peril and potential, and he's appealing for an emergency fund of $900 million. And you can understand why. The UN said last week that Somalia will have 1.4 million acutely malnourished children by the end of the year, and some 6 million people, half the population, are currently in need of some kind of help. But it's a measure, isn't it, Lindy, of the dreadful choices in Somalia, that the critical question facing the conference was whether aid comes before security or the other way round. The reality, of course, is that both are desperately needed.
Indeed. Well, tough choices indeed. Well, let's bring in CGTN's Abdullaziz Billow, who's joining us live from Mogadishu. Abdullaziz, as we know, the summit itself is in fact broadcast live on national television in Somalia. Just tell us about the level of optimism amongst the people in the country. Is there a sense that this particular summit, this conference, will bring about tangible change?
Well, Lindy, that's the feeling here on the ground, and that feeling is shared by many Somalis across the globe. Even on social media, they've taken to Twitter to talk to Somali leaders who are attending the event and to praise their efforts in addressing some of the key issues that they say are affecting Somalia. So the optimism is quite high at this stage, Lindy, here in Somalia, bearing in mind that Somalia is going to this conference, the 5th international conference for Somalia and the 3rd London conference, with a complete new administration, with a new president who enjoys quite a huge public support here in Somalia following his election victory, and also the administration itself, a new prime minister, a new council of ministers. So the agenda that the government went there with included security reform. That's the primary focus of President Farmajo, and also the humanitarian aspect here on the ground, where 6.2 million people have been affected. So the expectation here is that the international community will avert a possible famine here in Somalia and help end the hunger crisis that's affecting millions of Somalis here, 6.2 million to be precise. So the optimism is quite there. The expectation of the government is that the international community will help the new president achieve his campaign pledges, chief among them rebuilding of the country's security institution here in the country. The government went there with a much detailed plan compared to previous meetings, and that's the expectation here on the ground, that much will be accomplished out of this summit here in London.
Well, in that context of high expectations, Richard, let's bring you back in here for a minute. Security reform, of course, an important issue, as Abdullaziz just said a moment ago. Now, we know, of course, that East African regional leaders that are at the summit, they've been calling for more support from Western countries for their troops that are serving under the AMISOM mission there. Should we expect any change in the stance of Western countries, particularly from the European Union, who has been increasingly drawing back its financial support for AMISOM?
Well, the United States already has troops on the ground, and those troops are being pretty much given free rein by the White House, while the conference's UK hosts pledged both humanitarian aid and what the UK Prime Minister Theresa May called a long-term British commitment to strengthening Somalia's security forces in a bid to, quote, degrade al-Shabaab and allow Somalia to take over the security of the country. Will there be European boots on the ground outside of training missions? Unlikely. The politics involving the African Union and those East African leaders you mentioned there who attended the conference are too incendiary to allow European military meddling. The consensus leaning rather towards the Somali government taking over the running of security for the country. Indeed, Somalia's new president, Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, said al-Shabaab could be defeated in 2 years. But finances are critical, and he called on the international community to do more to forgive Somalia's debts. Lindy.
And indeed, I mean, the aim, of course, is peace and stability within by 2020, which is only just 3 years away. Abdulaziz, President Mohamed Abdullahi, as you say, has come in with a lot of great public support for him and his administration. But is there a sense that there is enough time, or that their approach is radically different from previous governments, especially as they engage with their international partners at this London conference?
Well, Lindy, if we listen to his speech today, President Farmajo said that Somalia had turned a new page in terms of administration, and we bear in mind that his election here was widely seen by many as a vote of confidence in the country's top leadership. Is that the public, he enjoys quite huge public support, so many are of the view that his election was an answer to a public quest for change. So definitely many are of the view here that President Farmajo's leadership will be quite different from past leaders. He was once a prime minister here in 2010, and he was credited by being the chief architect of the exit of al-Shabaab from here in Mogadishu. So he's been credited for that, and bearing in mind the situation here on the ground is that he's been president for 3 months. Now, in these 3 months, President Farmajo has traveled to a few countries, some of them key financial partners here of Somalia, and chief among them, he traveled to Saudi Arabia. That's one of the countries that exports livestock out of Somalia, and livestock trade is Somalia's primary source of revenue. So the president was there in Saudi Arabia to talk to Saudi authorities so that they can lend a helping hand to his administration that's trying to rebuild this country. And one of the deals that is struck with them is the rebuilding of key vital roads here in the capital, 350 kilometers to be exact. So the difference between the President Farmajo and past leaders here in Somalia is that once the president visits a particular country, he comes back with positive feedback, where he talks to the citizens using public forums and Twitter, so that he can talk to them through his meetings and what he talked with the leaders and what they agreed upon. So there's so much optimism here on the ground that came with his leadership, with his new government here, and many is expected that this London conference will yield tangible results here on the ground in terms of security, where the president called for an end to a 2-decade-long arms embargo here, where he said he wants that his forces should be well trained, well equipped, and well funded, so that they can be able to tackle the militants head on and replace the African Union force here in Somalia. So he has done quite a few changes, but he's just 3 months in office, and a hard battle lies ahead of him as he mounts a major militant attack here against al-Shabaab.
Indeed, it is just the beginning. Well, thank you very much, of course, to Abdulaziz Billow joining us there in Mogadishu. Richard Bestic live with us from London.